Right, so how are you? I say you were blown away by the speakers. So I might actually invite yourself, Nicola, to maybe respond to just everything you've heard tonight. And can I just say the level of speakers today is outstanding. What do you say?
I totally agree, and I would say, yeah, absolutely, incredibly inspiring. Quite overwhelmed, actually, and challenged, to be honest. I think from a number of perspectives. I think, first of all, I think there's been a very strong validation of the policy framework that we've put in place. This time last year, we were talking about launching our new policy. It's there. It's a better world. It's been referenced by a number of people. But up front and centre is reaching the furthest behind first. And Georgina articulated that very clearly, the real need for that. Up front and centre as well as gender equality. So I think I'm very proud of that, SDG 5, and I'm incredibly proud of that, but I'm also incredibly challenged by it. Because I think what was articulated by Father Michael, by Joni and by Georgina is that we're incredibly challenged to shift the dial for women and girls. We heard of the disproportionate burden on women and girls, the disproportionate vulnerability to HIV, the gender-based violence. It's endemic in many of the countries that we are working with and supporting. And to get, to really address the underlying causes of that is hugely challenging. And Georgina at the end outlined some ways in which we can do that. I think Ireland's voice is incredibly important. I think Ireland's own story of transformation, and that's taken many, many years, and I know Alva will speak passionately about that as being the centre of that drive for change, but it's taken a huge effort and a huge amount of time, but really important that we share that story and that our voice is heard on the international stage and that we support other countries, other communities and individuals who are on that journey. You want me to stop? I think I could keep talking. You see, when you're inspired, you just keep going, but I'll hand it back and I'll have a chance again when you ask me another question.
I was trying to be subtle there, Nicola. I was just trying, very subtle. Okay. So speaking of transformation, I think it's a great segue for Alva to speak in relation to just, I suppose, what the transformation that Ireland has been through the last few years, and maybe what maybe can be learned from other countries that are trying to break down stigma around HIV and AIDS.
Well, yes, absolutely. But I did want to say, that what we've all heard this evening seems to me to be, if you don't mind me answering a different question.
Yeah, please do. I'm quite used to it. I've interviewed Alva 100 times. Yeah.
It just seems to me to be really very important because we've heard really compelling and very powerful and highly informative talks from both Georgina and Joanny, and also from Father Michael Kelly, who is a very outstanding, very unusual, a very powerful and generous person. And what they are doing is saying to us here in Ireland, which is among the world's wealthiest nations, that we have a responsibility, we have an obligation, that we cannot stand by and see the wreckage, the devastation that's caused by HIV and AIDS-related illnesses in the world, and particularly from my standpoint as a feminist of decades and decades and decades, seeing what it is doing to girls, to young women, to older women. When I think that HIV and AIDS-related illness is the leading cause of death for women aged between, 16 and 49, basically women of reproductive age. That is a deeply shocking figure that we absolutely have to contend with and that we cannot close our eyes to here in this country, where we do close our eyes, which I know that you'll be speaking about, Ellie, later, but we do close our eyes to the reality of HIV for women here. So I say, absolutely, we need an agenda which, and I think we're beginning to see that emerging strongly now with the new Irish Aid policy, A Better World, where we are absolutely committed to tackling the systemic causes of of HIV and AIDS, which are rooted in poverty and which are rooted in the imbalance of power in the world, where certain parts of the world are impoverished while other parts of the world, including Ireland, are extremely privileged. And we absolutely have to tackle the systemic causes of women's inequality, the inequality of girls and women, which is rooted in patriarchy and misogyny, as we've heard repeatedly this evening. So I think we have a huge agenda. It is very urgent, but I am immensely inspired by what I've heard. And just to say that when I heard the wonderful young choir singing out with all your voices, make a choice, hear your voice. That's what we want for girls and for young women, and why not for boys and for young men too. But that freedom to make a choice is so crucial in your life, isn't it? And the ability to speak up for yourself. I mean, that's exactly what you were both saying from your different spaces. So it was very empowering to hear this. And I'm going to pass over now.
Thank you, Ailbhe. And so it brings me nicely to Ellie, because I think your work is of particular interest because your research is into women living with HIV, focusing on shame. And this is one thing that came about for the whole year, in the run-up to this event. I know Nadine and the team have been trying to find on this panel to have a woman affected with HIV in Ireland. Because last year when I chaired the event, there was Panty was here, Rory O'Neill and Robbie, and they were talking about how, in fact, I remember that moment where Robbie actually pulled out a leaflet, a HSC leaflet that had images of 3 gay men. That is the face of HIV and AIDS in Ireland. So where are the women, and what's happening? So what's come out of your research so far, Ellie?
That's like a perfect point to start on, because I just want to say I am here as a student from DCU, and I'm representing the stories of women living with HIV, because Nadine sent this to me and I said, I'm not exactly shocked, I suppose, at that outcome, but I suppose hopefully we're going to get there. But I suppose one of the issues is with, I suppose, the lack of women's voices. I guess is that we haven't really found the platform to encourage them, or I suppose it's a kind of a societal issue that we're not really facilitating their conversations, and we need to look at different ways, definitely, to kind of put their narratives up on a platform and say, yes, there are women out there who are living with HIV. If you are newly diagnosed, these are the different places that you need to go. There are, I suppose, women's groups there is a women's groups with HIV Ireland. That's who are helping me recruit in my study. One thing I'm definitely finding is that even recruitment to study in a confidential study is extremely hard. I have been a year in the recruitment process, or less than a year, maybe 10 months, and I have got 9 participants. And even through that experience, I have found, no, I can't participate in your study because I'm too ashamed even to tell my story. So as we know, Nadine introduced me to Brené Brown, the shame researcher in the States. We all know her, she's a legend. We should get her some here. And,
bring her here next year, Nadine.
And she posits that shame breeds shame. Silence breeds shame. Silence breeds shame. So if we don't have women who are able to kind of stand up and be a voice, when you're newly diagnosed with HIV, where do you go? I'm the only woman. This is what I hear all the time in my study. So how is somebody like me able to get this? I'm white, I'm Irish, I'm heterosexual. Those are the stories that are coming out. How is somebody like me able to get this? There's something wrong here if somebody like me is able to get this, because there isn't a kind of a strong network, there isn't a face out there for people to look at. But on the flip side, I do think from talking to 1 or 2 participants, again, I'm only representing 9 women at the minute, not the kind of general women in Ireland living with HIV. So I do think that there is kind of a push between them, not from anyone outside these women, that they do want a voice. They do want a voice to speak and to kind of stand for them. Maybe somebody who's been living with the condition for maybe a little bit longer, who's come through that experience of overcoming shame and owning their voice, owning their story. So I do think we are close to that point. They have said that themselves, but there's still a little bit of work to do, and we really need to focus on encouraging the stories of women, to not force them to come out, but to make them feel welcomed and want to tell their stories.
Make them feel that it's safe for them to be open. Joni, are you surprised that that the self-stigma and the shame is just as high here in Ireland than the countries that you work with?
Thanks for the question. I think we are more similar than we think we are as individuals, as persons, and an issue...
Different packaging.
Exactly, and sometimes the packaging can come the same way, but we can feel it different way. But you're completely right. Yes, across borders, my work in Benin or my work in the US or people that I collaborate with on other continents, the issue is the same. For decades, for centuries, women had been told that they're not good enough, they're not enough, they're not enough, and then it actually has a repercussion on every aspect of the life, not just on the economic ability, not just even when they are the smartest, they may not always get the most paid job, and even in their personal life, in deciding what they want their sexual life to be, how they want to negotiate condom and which partner they want to have sexual intercourses with. So I'm not surprised that the issue of shame, that the issue of stigma is also prevalent here. What I think definitely can help is we can use the power of media and tell the narrative and shape the narrative in a way that HIV is not only perceived as a death sentence, but we need to show people who are HIV positive, but who are glowing, who have their life going well, and who can also make a public testimony about, yes, someone can have HIV, but can have his or her life going. Another thing that I think is also really critical and really important is to also make sure that when someone knows his or her status, there is this support that is not just one-time counseling, but this support that goes along the continuum so that this person can develop the ability, even in his or her vulnerability, develop the ability to come back and take ownership of his or her life in future.
And Georgina, it's very interesting how you mentioned the wonderful stories of Nadia, Lobo, and Doti. Those names are going to take with me. And then you also shared your experience of, you're vocal, you're highly educated, motivated, and yet when you go to Zambia, you tend to, fit into that what is expected. The expectations takes over, and so it's a work in progress. So you could talk to someone like Lobo and Nadia and Doti and say, okay, you got to find your voice and speak up and be true to yourself. But the fact is, a month from that day, a year from that day, 10 years down from that day, the three women still be working on their confidence.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, it's funny because whenever we're on the flight on the way back to South Africa, I always say to my husband, as soon as we land, you're making me a cup of tea. And I'm like, all those 2 weeks, you have to, it's not going to be that. You really owe me a good 2 weeks of dinners, And so in many ways, yeah, it's about context, isn't it? In different contexts, you have to kind of do life, differently. And I think the thing is to recognize it and to try to shift it. Even now, as I was sitting here, it did occur to me sort of my next trip, will I be different? Can I be different? And I'm posing it as a question to myself because it's a whole set of things, culture and context is a whole set of things. But in many ways, I know that I have to be different because there are young women in that household and they need to see me being different. So I do have to be braver in that context. So what would that look like? What does being brave look like in that context, without sort of being totally excluded or even causing more it's complex, basically, the structures that put us in certain positions.
Absolutely. As a second-year psychotherapy student, I was just learning about last week the family systems and how, no one actually sat you down as a child and said, okay, this is the role you're going to take. But it just happens the family tells you you're going to be the fixer, or you're going to be the joker. You're the one who's going to try and keep the family together when it's falling apart. And it's just all unconscious, And then it's funny, those roles you take into outside the world, You suddenly, like, that's why I'm forever trying to fix people. It's like, because I was trying to do that with my own family. But it's those roles, and it's really hard. And I know coming up to Christmas, the phone is going to be ringing off the hook in our psychotherapy practice, because people they know they're going to be spending Christmas with their family, and then they're going to remember, that's why I only see them once a year.
Yeah. Can I add something? I think that just coming back to the issue of power as well, in some of the work that I've been doing, I've been working with young people, and we've been thinking about like girl-only spaces, and when you talk about girls' empowerment, girls' leadership, and one of the things that I have learned from these girl-only spaces where you empower girls is that when they go home, they're going home to the same situation. And in fact, in Eswatini, which is the new name for Swaziland, I love it, Eswatini. So in Eswatini, a group of young women said to us, actually, it's causing us more harm having these girl-only spaces, because you come home and then the boys are like, well, what were you talking about? Did you get food? Did you get money? Could you give me some? And then if the girls say, well, we're sort of talking about how to be like strong and powerful, they're like, oh, you're strong and powerful, are you? And then they just push them over. So it's actually led to more violence. So just speaking to the point about men and boys and working with men and boys in order for them to be able to support girls and young women, I think that's a really important thing, just in terms of power dynamics.
Thank you so much, Georgina. Nicola, coming back to you, because I know I cut you short earlier, but let's talk about, I suppose, Ireland's commitment to not just the global HIV situation, but just bring it down to Ireland and our domestic situation with the fact that infections increased by 8% last year. That's really worrying. Yeah. So what's going to happen? What can we do about it?
Yeah, I think one of the key messages is around openness. And I think that's coming from Ellie and the other speakers. And I think creating the space for people to be able to come forward. One is information, which is hugely important. But two is having the actual safe space to talk about it and to ask questions, to access support and access services. And that goes as much for young people here as it does for young people in other countries. And we were talking with Georgina earlier today, and she was talking about the visit to the school that she went to earlier. And there were young people, 14, 15 years of age, who were sexually active but hadn't heard of HIV. And to me, in Ireland, that is absolutely and utterly frightening. Absolutely and utterly frightening. Didn't really know what it meant. So I think information is a huge issue, and really the government and others really need to be much more open about providing that information, particularly for young people who are becoming sexually active at very young ages. So that would be one particular area.
I'm very conscious because it's just as I'm a parent that practices sex-positive parenting. So I've got a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, and for every time I clean them, I say, okay, Phoenix, I'm going to clean your penis, and Xavier, I'm going to clean your vulva. So, and I'm using appropriate terminology. And the other night, last night, for the first time in 6 months, my wife and I went on a date, and my 4-year-old just did not like it. He was like, why are you going out with mommy, and why can't we come? I said, one day you're going to grow up and you're going to fall in love, and you're going to hopefully want to do that too, and he's a 4-year-old. I'm having these conversations, So I think when you said the 14-year-olds, when the parents try to have that awkward conversation, chances are this was probably the first time they tried to have that conversation, and that's when the teenagers go, oh my God, this is mortal, get away from me, Alba, you want to come in? Sorry.
I think that's the whole question of basically education in one form or another, but very specifically of sex education and the adequacy or inadequacy of sex education. And that's, whatever country or part of the world we're talking about is really important. And I think that improving sex education for all children and young people is really important, whatever their gender. And in many ways, I think that improving an understanding of sex and sexuality is very, very key among boys and young men, is really key to the thriving, the flourishing, the well-being and the safety of girls and young women. And that if we don't take on those things together in parallel, that we're really barking up the wrong tree entirely. And we are in many ways actually repeating the unequal dynamics of power by in some ways saying it's for women to take responsibility here. Whereas actually it is, and I noticed in your wonderful stories, but at one point you said that, was it Labo fell pregnant? No woman falls pregnant, she is impregnated. So it's a very Irish phrase, by the way, she fell pregnant. So I was very amused to hear you using it. But I do think that that's really, really, really important. And the point that you then make, Dill, is also important because there is now a generation of young parents who are
Not so
better
young,
equipped. But I do actually think that sort of how to teach your children sex education for young parents is really very key. But that goes really to all of the issues that we've been talking about secrecy and about stigma and about discomfort in talking about sex. And we've certainly, I grew up in a country which is still, it's not completely cured, is it? No, which was so uncomfortable about sex that it couldn't even say the word. It was just something that happened. We weren't taught sex education at all. Well, it's not quite true. I had someone who came into our school and who said to us as girls that what we needed to do when we went out with boys was to keep our berries and our gloves on at all times. And that is an absolute quote. Fortunately, we didn't.
Is that, I can think of that song, You Can Keep Your Hat On. Right.
But it is getting back to the sense somehow that sex is dirty. And I really loved it that both of you in one way and another emphasized that we also need to be raising children and changing our own attitudes to seeing sex as a great gift and as a great pleasure, as, one of the great sources of joy in our lives as well. And we're light years away from that at the moment.
Ellie, you said you have found 9 participants after 10 months. Fair play to you. And I suppose, because everyone here can play a part, what can people who are within and outside of the HIV community in Ireland help women speak out and feel safe to be open about their status?
I mean, I guess if you're not a peer for people living with HIV, so if there's anyone in the room living with HIV, to be a peer for other people living with HIV. If you're outside of that, then just simply an advocate. Maybe if it's sharing a tweet, putting in your...
And be an ally.
An ally, sorry, yeah, an ally. So just being an ally, providing social support. So there have been 1 or 2 women who I have interviewed who didn't have anybody to talk about this issue that they were having. I was maybe the first person that they had talked in depth about it. Other than that, it was just a doctor or a nurse, and maybe a partner who they had shared their status with. But once social support came into play, the transformation in their well-being was really lovely to see. I had one participant, like as I mentioned, who didn't have anybody to talk to, and I had another participant who was really kind of strong-minded, had a kind of great lived experience living with HIV and was really coming through it. And with both of their permission, I said, "Can I put you in touch with each other?" And one can be a peer to the other, and it's kind of just blossomed into a great thing. So, I guess in a communal level, we need to start bringing women into the conversation more. How we do that, I guess, time will tell, and I hope to have some recommendations when I produce a thesis to actually do that. I haven't started analysing my findings yet, folks, so it's still very, very flat. But I think definitely bringing them into the conversation more. Also, one thing that I find kind of frustrating is that we have campaigns and testing, and I know they're a high prevalence group, but in the likes of Panty Bar, in the George, we have testing there for gay men. And then as I have mentioned already, some of my participants have said, I didn't know I could get something like this.
Have them in women's spaces, basically.
You see, that's the thing. Where are the campaigns to say, ladies, who's going to get their HIV test? Myself and my supervisor were talking last Christmas about a potential campaign we were working with, and she had a great idea. Coming up to Christmas around World AIDS Day, have your nails done, have your hair done, have your HIV test.
Yeah.
I mean, something like that, so simple.
I'm thinking of that song, do your hair toss, check
Yeah.
your nails.
Take your HIV test.
Status,
I
and
mean,
then feeling good as hell.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay, Ellie, go ahead. I have to open it up to the floor. Anything else?
Yeah. No, I just think more campaigns for women that is inclusive of women and not just-
absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so you have been so patient the last nearly 2 hours, so I really would love to hear at least 1 or 2 questions from, wonderful. Okay, we're going to leave it to 2 questions because we literally have 8 minutes. Yeah, okay. Oh my God, James, of course. Oh, I'm going to jump down. James, hero.
All right, let the men speak. Well, James.
I'm treading very carefully here because I'm sitting looking at some amazingly strong women. So as a man living with HIV, maybe can I put the word gentle in brackets? Just be kind to me. But just 1 or 2 comments. Firstly, as a person living with HIV, I just want to say thank you to Irish Aid and to the Global Health Forum for, again, hosting this very valuable lecture, and also for continuing to invite me, even though I couldn't come at some years. My experience of living with HIV and AIDS, I don't really want to go into the whole personal side. I was just making notes in my diary. I'm just starting the stage of writing chapter 7 in my own life and my own life cycle. No, this is just very private. How private is that? But I do want to say that I was infected by HIV when I was 21. So the stats don't change. I became sick with AIDS, an AIDS-related illness, when I was 27. So there was a period of time that I had to give up my career, move back home, back into the farming community. And one of the things that I did say to my own family around was, don't tell anybody. So it's no different here in Ireland as it is in Cape Town. I've been there. You guys have stolen part of my heart. I need it back. But then the other side, for me, I did get well, thank God. The medication did work in 1997. So I committed 15 years, the next stage of my life, insofar as, okay, I'm very blessed. I continue to be very blessed. Any of us with HIV or AIDS that are alive today are very blessed and very supported by so many people here in this room, within the Irish health sector, within the community and voluntary sector. I was involved in networking probably, I don't know, almost informally 25% of the infected population from 97 till about 2012. For me in 2012, my aim was to start the next chapter. My mother was reaching 80, and I thought, okay, my mother and family have done so much for me, so I want to celebrate my 50th birthday with my twin brother, with my mother, and the rest of my family. And I've done that. I've been with them since then. And my mother passed away last year. I thank her for her life. But it leaves me with a tremendous peace of mind. And half of my heart is so happy, is so at peace. The other half is still broken because I'm still hearing the same stories. And I suppose rather than focusing on the micro, I've always looked, okay, there's a problem, so how do we sort it? So if we're talking about ending stigma by 2030, how do we do that? You know, is that an aspiration or is it a dream? Do we leave it up to the gods, the Catholic God or the Pentecostal God or whatever other God? Or is there already, or perhaps is there a place for a governance body that will develop a domino effect, using all our international agreements and using them to hold our governments accountable?
Very good.
That's working from the global to the local. Secondly, and my final point here is, I contacted the...
James, the last time I'm going to give you the mic.
Yeah, no, I wasn't here last year or the year before, so I'm making up for those years.
But the doors of the theatre are going to open in 3 minutes.
I'm about to finish, but this is important. This morning I contacted the National Council for Curriculum Assessment because our Minister for Health did commit last year around the repeal the 8, he did commit to a sexual health education in schools. So that hasn't happened. It's at stage 3 in the Dáil. Last April, 12 months. What's that? 18 months. So we need to keep the pressure on.
Brilliant. Thank you,
Finally,
James.
I want to say thanks to everybody.
Yeah. Thank you so much, James. Okay, I know I'm under strict instructions that we have to finish at 7, so I'm going to go back to the panel. For a final response, and then you can ask the questions from the panelists while we have our refreshments. So, Alva, any final thoughts or response to James?
Well, first of all, I think that just in relation to sex education program, yes, that's long overdue, long overdue for overhaul, and it needs to be absolutely thoroughgoing. And it needs to be for boys and girls. We also, of course, have been promised a free contraception program. We know that access to contraception is so important for girls and women of childbearing age all across the world, and that, in fact, denial of effective access or right to contraception is certainly one of the factors leading to girls and young women contracting HIV. So that is hugely important in global terms. Over and above that, I mean, there are, of course, a number of practical points, but I would say that I do think, and I agree with the speakers this evening who were so wonderful, that this is a very dangerous time. This is a very dangerous time politically, geopolitically, because there is a pushback against women's rights and freedoms. Of that I've absolutely no doubt. And just to point that up, the UNFPA Nairobi Summit, which unfortunately I couldn't attend, but it was important, but it was also significant that the word abortion was hardly mentioned, yet one of the main goals is to reduce to zero maternal death. Now, that simply can't be done, actually, without abortion, for example. But that is also a kind of a code for we are opposed to women's full freedoms and full human rights. Let's keep rights absolutely in there in all the work that we do. Let's keep the focus, as you put it so well, Georgiana, on power and on power dynamics. Let's keep our eyes on what we need to do actively. I love the football example, Johnny. Let's keep our eyes on those things because the next 10 years are absolutely crucial.
I want to make a comment, yeah.
It's been fantastic. I think some of my key messages are around very strongly no time for complacency. I think that was really what James was really pushing hard. And I think the importance of activism. And I think it's lovely to have so many young people here tonight and to hear their voices through song, but also we need to hear their voices really strongly demanding the support and services that you need. And I think a lot of young people are claiming the space in climate action, and it's really making a difference. So there is a real space there to go forward. I think from the Irish government perspective, you've heard from the Minister and various commitments that we will, continue to work in this space. And I think one of the biggest things that we can do is to ensure that our voice is clearly heard in international fora and to really protect the space that we have worked so hard over very many years to get, to protect that, given that there's such a pushback. And I think we're in quite a privileged position to do that as Ireland. And, you know, the challenge is ours now, and I think we need to step up. While others are pushing back, we really do need to step in and step up. Thanks.
Participants, absolutely, yeah. So it's great to have kind of both Irish voices here, but definitely international voices, because there's so many parallels that we're seeing. So it's great to have that. Super informative as well. I'd just like to say to people, when you are considering HIV, have conversations with people that you think may be unaware, kind of pass the knowledge forward, what you've learned here today, especially you young people. Go out and kind of tell your friends what you've learned about U equals U and PrEP and women's rights especially. But also, just when I kind of talk about the shame and stigma that does come out in women's narratives that I have heard of, on the flip side of that, there's some really encouraging narratives as well of really strong women. They are going to be pioneers in the next couple of years of kind of the faces of this. Or maybe not even the faces, but they're going to be the ones that are talking to the other women that are newly diagnosed as well. So that's also really encouraging information. It's not all doom and gloom. So.
I would like to highlight the fact that in certain regions of the world, including here, sometimes more than 50% of new infections occur in adolescents and youth, so 15, 24 years old. So let's not forget our adolescents and youth and making sure that we start early, because it's going to be another generation that we will miss. One thing. Second thing that we learned through the work of the Young Beninese Leader Association, let's reach adolescent, youth, or adult where they are, where you highlight music and song with such excitement that came up from the audience. Let's use what they like. If it is social media, if it is music, if it is a song contest, let's reach them where they are. And last but not the least, there is an urgency of action. We should not get to 2030 without eradicating or at least decreasing new infection and death around HIV/AIDS. So it's also your responsibility, my friends, my sisters, my brother, to advocate, to mobilize around you, to take the message that you heard here, go into your class, into your community. It can start with just one person. You can bring 3 friends around you. We were 2 people, we mobilized 300 people in a week. You can do better. There is an urgency, and we do count on you.
Thank you, Jonia. And finally, Georgina.
So my last message is around stigma, and just speaking to James's point about how, you know, some things have just remained the same. And stigma is just one of those issues, right? It's a massive barrier to being able to live life fully. There's a global partnership to actually address stigma. And it came out of last year, December's UNAIDS board meeting, where they convened quite a high-level group to actually properly tackle the issue of stigma. And GMP Plus is part of the conveners, and it's major kind of politics that's happening to work with countries around the world to get government commitments to actually doing something about stigma at country level. So we need to watch the space there, but really need to be pushing for actual action around stigma and to build people's resilience and to have people living with HIV leading that. Because as you said, there are incredible examples of people who have overcome, you know, who've really built the resilience and been able to speak out. And how do we draw on that? And how do we put in place other actions that support people to live as fully as possible? So definitely stigma, a bit less talk and lots more action around it.
Thank you so much. Please, round of
Your
applause
Cape Town.
for these amazing
Cape Town
speakers.
sister.
Georgina Caswell, Dr. Joni Marlene Beva, Nicola Brennan, Alva Smith, and Ellie Marley for being such